Speight Jenkins is celebrating 25 years, remarkable years, as the General Director of Seattle Opera. Speight's fervor has raised Seattle Opera's international reputation and made Seattle a Wagner center. Neither San Francisco, Chicago, or even the Met now performs a full ring circle in a week's time. Described as a fast-talking, opinionated, outspoken Texan, Speight was fascinated by opera very young. But, quote, my parents were not what I would call opera lovers. Speight graduated from Columbia Law School, was a freelance journalist, assistant editor of the Opera News, New York Post music critic, television host of Live at the Met, and guest lecturer for the Seattle Ring. From that, the Opera Board appointed him General Director, even though he had no experience. Speight acknowledged it was a big gamble on their part, but Speight learned on the job. Cast singers who were actors, designed McCall Hall for operas, inaugurated super titles, and survived budgets growing to $21 million plus. He hired renowned stage director Stephen Wadsworth to do The Ring and next Saturday's opera. The Met wanted Wadsworth as its director too. To get him, they asked Speight to co-produce Iphigenia. Thus, Seattle became the first regional company the Met has ever asked to partner with it. Speight's goal is to make people, quote, more aware of what they are going to see, to get them more involved so that they will derive more enjoyment. So please welcome Speight Jenkins to do that for us right now.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. First thing I want to apologize for is not wearing a coat, but with this post-surgical contraption I have to wear, a coat really doesn't work. Today I want to talk about the preparation of a little-known, but very great opera for Seattle Opera and the Metropolitan. Iphigenia in Tauride by Christoph Willibald Gluck was given his first performance in Paris in 1779. Gluck's works are not performed quite as much as a lot of composers. He was a very kind of a modern man in one sense because he was born in Germany. He went to school in Prague. He learned about opera in Italy. He worked in England. Then he made his great successes in Vienna and finally had tremendous success in Paris because he was under the personal support and auspices of Marie Antoinette. What is important for us is that basically Gluck is the founder of modern opera. Up to the time of Gluck, opera was very much in the control of singers. They did what they wanted to. They had an indication of lines, but the composer was not that important, nor was the drama. Gluck said that opera had been originally invented to make it equal music and drama, and he composed many operas that were very important with the drama, that the music comes out of the words. This is what he said again and again. It was very different. It was very revolutionary. You can't really say that he started modern opera because Mozart, really, who followed him shortly, created the sense of what we have in opera today. But he was the revolutionary that began it. I mentioned this Iphigenia that we're going to do really came up with a lunch that I had with Peter Gell, the new general manager of the And he came to me and asked me at that lunch if I was willing to co-produce this opera with the Metropolitan in this fall slot. Now, what does co-production mean? It means that both companies will have the same sets, costumes, lighting, and frequently, as in this case, different casts. But of course, and the same director, the same team working on it. This is an ability of, this helps you in sharing costs. For 2007, I had planned another opera and cast it because in the world of opera, actually the difference between 2005 and 2007 is like the difference of a week because I planned 4 or 5 years ahead. So I had an opera planned at this point. But I did know almost immediately that some of the people, the two most important people I'd asked could work in this opera and would be good for it. So I knew that was a possibility. The big question was, could we afford it? And would it be right for Seattle? I was in a funny position with this opera because I have been in opera for over 60 years, but I really didn't know Iphigenia very well. I knew it as a story, but I didn't know much about the piece. And so I wanted very much to see whether I liked it. I listened to quite a few, I studied the score, I went over it, and I decided that it was a very great opera, which I was shocked that I didn't really know. But the finances were a problem, because to do a new production, even a co-production, is more expensive than a rental. We were going to rent the sets at this time. We also were going to do a more popular opera, which would sell more tickets. And so this was a problem. And there's one problem about Iphigenia that you might not realize. When you do an opera, any opera, if you do an opera with a title that people hesitate to pronounce, you sell fewer single tickets. This is because people don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to go to a Werther and call it Werther, and people say, "What are you talking about?" You know. So we've made a joke about it on our website, and we've talked about it because Iphigenia can be pronounced many different ways. It can be Iphigenia, it can be Iphigenia. You can do almost anything with it, and it's legal. And there are people who are named this can call themselves in a lot of different ways. I just tend to say Iphigenia because it makes sense to me. But because of the expense of it, I went, which I wouldn't normally do in a case of making a choice about an opera, but I went to the chairman of the board and the president, discussed it, and they said, absolutely, there's no question about it, because, as John mentioned, it was a co-production with the Metropolitan. Now, why is this important to us? Why does this make a hoot of difference to Seattle Opera for us to co-produce with the Met? Well, the Met, as you know, and you've seen it many times, you've seen this picture many times, is the national house. It is the national opera house of the United States. It broadcasts on Saturday afternoon through much of the season. Under Peter Gelb, it now has they have films in films of this year. It'll be 8 new productions. They come out all over the country for people to see. The Met has a tremendous national reputation, international reputation, and a huge media, international and local. So it is significant that we are the first company, the first regional company, actually the first company ever to be asked to co-produce with the Metropolitan and do the work in our city first, and then take it directly to the Met, where it will then be played. This is an honor, and it's a funny kind of honor. It's an honor not only for us generally, but it also means something in the city. First, generally, Seattle Opera has a reputation all over the world for our ring cycle and for doing Wagner. For us to do a major opera that is completely different from Wagner in a different way, and for the Met to pick it up, adds to our reputation everywhere, because it shows we're not just playing on one string. But another thing is that in America, and this is just a matter of fact, most people tend to think that everything in New York is better than anywhere else. Now, I wouldn't say that that's the truth myself. I lived in New York for 20 years, and I think I can speak to that. But this is the general feeling of things. And I think in our city, it is important for people to realize that the Metropolitan comes here, sees our work, likes it, and believes that what we do can work in New York just as well as it can here. And so I think these were the reasons why I chose to do it. I first saw the design for Iphigenia at a New Year's Eve party in the year 2005. The designer who lives here in Seattle at this point showed me on the back of an envelope what he was thinking about, and I thought it was a great idea, and we moved forward with it. The designs were completed with approval of the Met and of Seattle last November. The build took from January to April. It had to be done pretty early because the Met has they have to work on their productions. The previous spring because they do so many different operas. And they have to do the technical work way ahead of what we would. There's also a problem of doing with the Met, which adds to the expense. The Met is a repertory house, which means that they present in a 2-week period 4 or 5 operas. Everything you do for the Met has to be able to be put on the stage in an hour and a half and taken off the stage in an hour and a half. In Seattle, we put a show up. It stays for the whole run because we only do 1 opera. But that, of course, adds to the expense. If you've got to take everything apart, you have to make it in this way. Now, this didn't worry me at all because our shop, the shop in Renton, can really build anything. Robert Schaub is my technical director. Michael Moore has been the head of the shop for a long time. And we have built, of course, one of the most involved rings in the world. But there's one other thing you may know about to indicate what we can build. A few years ago, the monorail had an accident, as you will remember. And they had to get new doors for the monorail. They went to Germany and found that the cost of the doors, if it was made with the German company that created the monorail, would be equal to the entire cost of the monorail when it went up. We heard about this and called them up and called the city and said, would you like us to build the doors? And so we built them for a very little bit of expense, which was very nice with us and Mayor Nicholas. He likes us a lot because of this. But we can... So what we're doing with Iphigenia and Tauride is to create a massive grand opera. This is not little. This is one of the biggest productions. Probably is the most complicated single new production Seattle Opera has ever done. It is, and so I wanted to show you some slides of it to see this. First of all, some of you may not realize when you hear about opera, you hear about sets, you don't think about quite how complicated these things can be. You see the steel beams at the top. This is an indication, without any lights, of course, of the set. The working with the Metropolitan in Seattle is easy in one respect because we have the same width stage. They're much deeper than we are, but the depth doesn't make any difference. You make it as deep as you want to be. But the width is the same. But you see these steel beams at the top. This is an unusual set because it has a ceiling and it has walls and it has a rear. Most of the time sets don't have a ceiling. Now, there are also other interesting things in it. You will notice here that this is all about the goddess Diana. This is the largest statue we ever built in Seattle. The goddess of Diana, the goddess of the hunt and of fertility. You notice her with her arrows, and she is the goddess of fertility, has 56 breasts, which you will notice there. It's one of the things I wanted to do more than anything was to take the little model of this statue and recreate it and sell it. Unfortunately, it just cost too much. We couldn't make it. We couldn't sell it where people would buy it at a price. But I thought it would be wonderful because I think it's a great statue. There are other things, such as the altar, because the sacrificial altar, which I think is quite beautiful. One of the things about Tom Lynch in his designs, and one of what we do in our shop, is that when you go up on stage in Seattle Opera with his work, things look as pretty when you're right up next to them as they do in the theater. Many designs on stage look good from the theater, but when you get up to them, you see they're rough. It's really not the case in this one, but that's one of the indications. And finally, 2 pictures we have here, one slide after another, of this is not really lit the way you see it in performance, but this shows you when you get, this is an idea of the full set with the statue, the altar. On the left of the stage is a prison, which is part of the story. There's a prison part, and then you have the Temple of Diana. And we'll show the next one too, which is virtually gives you another angle. So you see it's really a big set. Now, what is Iphigenia about? This brings us back to Greece and to the Trojan War. The saga of the House of Atreus is the original story of a play. The play by Aeschylus of the Aristeia is the first play we have. And the relationships in the House of Atreus are family relationships. There are a lot of murders, there's a lot of violence, but the reason the Greek plays have always maintained interest to people is because they are a family situation. And even though the relationships are much more extreme, they're far, far more extreme than we would hopefully have in any situation, the problems they suggest are the problems that happen in any family. This is why Greek drama works. And of course, the message of Iphigenia, the message of any Greek drama, is that power over love, that you should, if given a choice between power and love, is is love you should take. If you take power, you're going to go the wrong way. Also, in Greek drama, actions have consequences. Now, I want to show you this chart, which gets us into the house of Atreus. You notice that Menelaus is the brother of Agamemnon. Many of you know this. I'm just reiterating it for some that might be not looked at it for a while. Menelaus, I'm not teaching. Menelaus is the brother of Agamemnon. Menelaus was married to Helen. Paris, who was a Trojan prince, came and wooed Helen, took her away. Menelaus went to his brother Agamemnon and said, we must bring her back. I must have her back. Agamemnon wanted to do this because Troy was the richest city of the time and he wanted to attack it. So he assembled 1,000 ships to sail and attack Troy. This is why Helen is called the woman who launched 1,000 ships, the face that launched 1,000 ships. Agamemnon was married to Clytemnestra, who was also a descendant of the gods. This was Agamemnon. They had 3 children, Iphigenia, Electra, Orestes. Orestes' friend, a very close friend, who was a very close friend of his, is named Pylades. Now, that's just to keep in mind how the situation went. What happened was, when he put the 1,000 ships together, and they were ready to sail, a wind blew against them. It wouldn't stop. For 3, 4, 5 days, a week, it wouldn't stop. They realized it had to come from the gods. They went to a soothsayer, and the soothsayer said, Diana is against this attack on Troy, but if you, Agamemnon, sacrifice your eldest daughter, the wind will stop. So he lured his daughter to Aulis, where they were, convinced her that this is what she must do for him and for his family, and he set to sacrifice her. In one story, he in fact does sacrifice her, and the wind stops, and they're able to sail. In the story that we deal with, which is by Euripides, when he raised the knife over Iphigenia, the goddess Diana came and swept her up and took her away, substituting a doe in her place, but the people all saw it as Iphigenia. But she was actually taken away. She was taken to an island called Tauride. Now we will show you Iphigenia in our costume design by Martin Pagladinus, who's a Tony Award winner costume designer who we are very fortunate to have. This is the design for the costume, and you will see Diana, who also appears in the opera. So she was taken to Tauride to become the priestess of her temple. At the same time, back in Greece, this is not part of the opera, but this is important to understand what the opera is about. In Greece, the Trojan War began. As you know, it lasted 9 years. The Greeks beat the Trojans. Agamemnon comes home afterwards. His wife, Clytemnestra, well, first let's see Agamemnon. His wife, Clytemnestra, was furious over the fact of sacrificing her eldest daughter, and she waited for him, and the first night he was there, she embraced him feverishly, put a hood over his head as she embraced him, and stabbed him 10 times, killed him. Agamemnon fell dead. They had sent their son Orestes away before this, and they hoped he would never come back because they knew he might take vengeance. In due course, Orestes comes back, and he kills Clytemnestra. He kills his mother in vengeance to complete the event for his father. This was appropriate in the sense that he was doing this for his father, but the gods could not accept matricide. They didn't bother about patricide, but they didn't like matricide, even though and so Orestes was forever after. We'll see Orestes was forever after hit with the Furies. The Furies were after him at all points. The Furies that were sent. Every time he went to sleep, the Furies would go after him because he had killed his mother. Now, what Iphigenia had done when she had been taken to Tauride was to be in Diana's temple. In the temple, she was required to do sacrifices. There were many sacrifices in Tauride because the king of Tauride, Montoas, had dreamt that he was going to be killed by a stranger. So, unfortunately, every stranger who landed in Tauride was taken and was killed. Not a good thing for tourists. So, at any rate, so that is what Iphigenia had to do. And now we get into the actual opera. This background is crucial to understand what goes on. In the opera, she is horrified at what she's doing. She's miserable at what she's doing. And in this place come two Greeks that are washed up on the shore. One is her brother Orestes. The other is his friend Pilate, who we'll see next. They don't identify themselves, and without detailing all about the opera, Orestes wants desperately to die because the Furies drive him crazy. When they come, when she discovers they're Greeks, she makes the decision that she's going to send one of them back to Greece in the hope that they can help her and can get her away from this. She makes the decision that she's going to send Pilate, keep her brother there. She's going to kill her brother, but she doesn't know, of course, it's he. He doesn't identify himself, and she doesn't identify herself. 3 times she tries to kill him. And the 3rd time, he says, as she raises the knife over him, he says, so must my sister Iphigenia have felt when she was sacrificed. So they realize they are then brother and sister. And it works out because Pilate arrives, they're able to kill the king of Tauride. There's a tremendous battle, but Diana comes down from heaven and says, stop this fighting. It's all done. The gods are going to accept Orestes because he has suffered enough. No longer does he have to suffer. He can go back and be the king of Greece. You go with him to Iphigenia, and it all works out in that sense. Now, the story is really, when you synopsize any opera story, it may sound silly. It is really a very, very powerful story. One that is powerful, one that is beautifully told with music, and one that is really full of meaning. The whole relationships of brothers and sisters, of fathers and mothers, of fathers and children, of all of this is laid out. And I think with Stephen Wadsworth's direction, and with really gorgeous costumes by Pacladinos, and a wonderful set by Martin Pacladinos, and a wonderful set by Thomas Lynch, it's really going to be quite a performance. Now, what we want to do for today is to have the opportunity to hear a little bit of the music, and I've asked Marie Plett, who's one of our Iphigenias, to come and sing one of the most famous arias from the opera, O Malheureuse Iphigenie. Miss Marie Plett has sung with Seattle Opera in many different composers, many different operas. She's sung Mozart, she's sung Wagner, she has sung Offenbach, she's sung Bizet, she's sung a great deal with us. And she will sing O Malheureuse Iphigenie with Jay Rosenthal at the piano.
Thank you, Speight. Don't forget President's up here afterwards. And I want to just tell you that next week it's political excitement. Mark Wright's going to referee the pros and cons of the upcoming transportation package. Pro championed by Julia Patterson, King County Council member, and con by Kemper Freeman, Bellevue businessman and Rotarian. We're going to showcase a little entertainment and keep things easy with an amazing sound from the voices of the village. At the Red Lion, next week, we're adjourned.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health,